We're going to move on now to our next speaker, who is Roger Ace from the Regional Council perspective. So take it away, Roger.
Okay. Hey, everyone. I'm Roger Ace. I'm the Senior Terrestrial Ecologist at the Greater Wellington Regional Council. So in our region, we've got long-running Tier 1 regional health program using the National 8K grid. We've got a Tier 2 forest health, comparing managed and unmanaged forests. And we've got several managed management effectiveness bird monitoring programs. I also convene the Terrestrial Ecology Forum, brings together ecologists from across regional councils to share their expertise and to try and develop standardized monitoring methods. So with this background, I'm going to talk to you about what the regional councils want and need from research. So to understand where we're coming from, you need to understand our drivers, and the main one is the RMA. This requires the regional councils to develop policies to maintain Indigenous biodiversity. To inform our policies, we need to understand the state of our ecosystems, the pressures they face, and the impacts that these pressures will have on their health and persistence. The RMA also requires regional councils to monitor the effectiveness of their policies. And for this, we need help developing standardized monitoring methods. So an example might be to help us understand whether our policies are preserving enough forest habitat to maintain Indigenous bird diversity in our regions. But policy is not just about regulation, it's not just about rules. Regional councils also use incentives. And in the Wellington region, we have our key native ecosystem program. And this program aims to conserve the most representative examples of ecosystems by supporting their biodiversity management. And we need to understand whether this management is being effective. A lot of the biodiversity management we support is on private lands, but regional councils also manage large tracts of public land, those blue areas on the map, in which we promote ecosystem health. And we're also responsible for biosecurity across the country, including all of the pest, plant, and animal management outside of public conservation lands. To do this, we develop and implement regional pest management plans, and we need to know whether these plans are being effective in achieving their desired outcomes. So this brings us to two sets of research priorities. We need information to base our policies on, and we need to develop methods to monitor their effectiveness. Our policy information needs break down into four related research questions. First, is there some level of predation and competition with which pests, plants, and animals that our Indigenous forest birds can tolerate? If we can't achieve complete control through pest eradication, what should we aim for? Here I'm not only thinking about the rodents, mustelids, and possums, but also the effects of deer on forest recruitment and exotic birds that spill over from our urban and production landscapes and persist in restored habitats. Next, we need to know how much habitat we should aim to retain through our policies so that we can ensure the persistence of our Indigenous biodiversity and the ecosystem processes that create it and sustain it. An example of the type of research needed here is whether we can set regional targets and develop action plans for the retention of forest ecosystems that are informed by habitat requirements of key species. Associated with this, we need to understand how birds move between habitat patches to understand how we can maintain their ability to persist in fragmented landscapes. Yesterday, John showed the work that has been done on understanding gap limitations of our Indigenous forest birds. Manaaki Whenua has been investigating the role that mainland islands, fenced sanctuaries, and biodiversity corridors have to play in maintaining birds in our landscapes. But what might be this configuration of these features that could maintain minimum viable interbreeding populations that will persist in the face of climate-driven stochastic events. We should really start to think big. It'd be great if we could put a model on the table that identifies the opportunities to create stepping stones and link our existing forests to make these ecosystems more resilient. We need to understand how these and other pressures interact to determine the habitat quality for indigenous forest birds and how this affects their ability to persist and to do so in the face of climate change. As an example, in our region, we've seen a steady decline in tree species diversity and density in the hot water collection area. That's the area just south of the Taruras. We're losing the palatable trees and shrubs that have shown no real recruitment since the 1980s, despite regular deer culling and possum control. We need to understand the impact that this is having, not only on food resources, but also on the forest structure and complexity that provides habitat for the indigenous bird populations. The second part of our research needs is to develop methods to underpin monitoring programs so that we can detect the outcomes we're hoping to achieve. We have a range of established bird monitoring programs in the Wellington region, but most regions across the country don't. And it'd be easy to say that there's a heap of literature out there and they can apply the DOC protocols, but councils need support to understand how to design their monitoring programs. They need to know how to stratify their sampling, what their minimum sampling sizes should be to achieve defendable powers of detection, understand the implications of sampling in different seasons, what to do when sites become inaccessible, and what data they should be collecting to account for changes in the environment, and data collectors over time. An interesting problem you encounter when you have long-running programs. We need help developing national standards for bird health monitoring. We need a data repository to allow for the data to be federated nationally. And we need more people to be trained to do this work because we're struggling to find enough staff. But that's not all we need, because the requirements on councils are changing. While species survey and monitoring used to be considered DOC's territory, new legislation, like the National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity, is going to require us to survey and monitor species distributions and abundance. The thing is, we can't survey everywhere, so we need models to help us understand where to look for different species and methods that allow us, with a reasonable level of certainty, to determine whether a species is present at a site. And in case you hadn't picked it up, regional councils are quietly obsessed with the impacts of climate change and what these mean for ecosystems, habitats, and species. So, in summary, we need research to inform our policy development. We need to develop methods for monitoring management effectiveness and methods to detect species distributions. And we need to understand how climate change could and is affecting our biodiversity and ecosystem processes and what we might do about that. I'd like to end by thanking our team, and especially Philippa Crisp, our team leader in the red coat in the front of the center of the picture, who's retiring at the end of this month. It's been her vision and drive that's established our surveillance and monitoring networks that are quite the envy of the other regional councils. So thank you for listening.
Thanks very much there, Roger. I think you've just walked us through and the full depth of the problems that we're all facing. So you've done a great job of that. Yeah, I sometimes think that the rules seem to be a sort of like the rules for regional councils. Do you ever feel like the rules for regional councils are different from Department of Conservation?
Yeah, I think we are very much dealing with the same challenges. We often just don't do it in the most connected up way. So we'll end up spreading the national resource even thinner than it is, which is really unfortunate.
Yes, okay. Yeah, it feels like starting with policy and like lots of emphasis on working out your policies and designing programs that have a good chance of working or getting a bad echo here, and then measuring those. Yeah, sometimes I feel in the department though we don't necessarily start with that policy, or we sort of do our work that we think is right and then go, oh, what was the policy again? So yeah, great to have that reminder there. Question from the audience: data sharing and having central databases are important. Pest control alone has many platforms and the data gets muddy with different groups liking different platforms. Care to comment on that one?
Yeah, we've certainly seen a profusion of these platforms as people have launched into pest control activities, and we've seen different groups being driven by different needs, and so they've kind of gone off in different directions. But the problem with that is that we can't federate the data to form a unique national picture, and there really is an opportunity here for some leadership in this space to pull together a national platform that can work for everyone, that offers different levels of complexity and talks to other tools. But we need it not only for our pest control, we need it for our monitoring of birds. We've got the vegetation survey database, but there's a whole lot of other aspects that we monitor along with this information at our sites. And it'd be good to have a way to bring that all together.
Okay, all right. Oh, well, that's great. Thank you very much, Roger, for your time and effort on that.